Welcome to DevOps Interview Part 7. In this video, we'll be seeing two more interview questions that can appear. The idea is to understand the motivation behind the question. Why are they asking this question to us? Also understand the concept and then answer it. Let us see the first question in this particular set. The first question is coming from the domain CI/CD. So the question is, how is your Jenkins setup done and managed? What are they trying to ask you in this question? I will try to explain this. Usually, when I ask this question to my students, many of my students respond saying, our Jenkins setup is 2 nodes. Our Jenkins setup is just 1 node. And then I ask a question, how many applications do you have? They say around 15. Is it really possible to have 15 applications actively running in production and staging with just 2 Jenkins machines? Not really. If you have learned the Jenkins concept properly, you know there is a master-slave architecture present, or master-follower architecture present that has to be set up, or Jenkins master agent setup. So here they are trying to understand if you are really a hands-on engineer or you have just understood Jenkins. This is the motivation behind the question. Now, how do you answer this particular question? Let us try to understand this. Any Jenkins setup, if you just have one master and let us say one agent, this is good. It is not bad. But what happens is you contradict your answer by saying you have 10 applications. You contradict your answer saying you have 10 applications or 20 applications. Please understand, if you have 20 applications, on an average, you will have 5 to 10 builds. These builds are of very big code. So this can be a Java code, this can be a Python code, this can be anything. So if you just have one master and one agent setup done, that is not a scalable setup, point number one. So it is not a scalable setup. It is not disaster proof, and it doesn't support the need of your application. So what is something that you should remember? In production, that is wherever you go in the companies, they will have a scalable setup, Two, they will have some setup that can do at least 40 builds in a given day. Because Jenkins is doing builds for both staging and live. For both live and staging, it will be doing the builds. You don't have a Jenkins that is separate for staging. You don't have a Jenkins that is separate for live. That is not how it works. You usually have one Jenkins. So what are the two things you should remember? Scalable and same Jenkins for live and staging, and the capacity to build 30 to 40 builds per day. So how should the setup look like? So you will have one master, and then you will have multiple agents. Now the way the agents will be set up, it will be in an auto-scaling group. In an auto-scaling group, you will have EC2 instances, let us say, and inside these EC2 instances, you will have agents. Now this design is not perfect. I'm not saying this is a perfect design, but this is design that will scale and solve the 2 points that we are mentioning, okay? So the master will assign the tasks of build to the agent, and because the agent is in an auto-scaling group, the ASG can scale. So if you are getting 20 builds all of a sudden, then the ASG can really scale and the agents are able to build a lot of things. That is one. Second, you have live and staging. So you can also have another auto-scaling group. If you want to have a real separation, you can have a separate auto-scaling group, one for live and one for staging. And you will decide which agent to use in which auto-scaling group to use in your pipeline. So if it is staging, you use this particular agent group or agents with this tag. This will help to deploy this particular setup into this auto-scaling group and get built. This is a real-time setup, okay? So how do you answer this question in the interview? To answer this question in the interview, you should start with saying, whenever we build Jenkins in a production setup, we consider two key parameters. One, is our setup scalable? Two, can it handle a lot of builds and give flexibility and stability for our development team, both in live and staging? Based on these two parameters, for the existing project that I am working, we have a master machine, which is independent machine that is running on a EC2 instance with a very good capacity. And then we have two separate autoscaling groups. These two separate autoscaling groups act as a agent group, meaning they will only spin up agents. Autoscaling group 1, let us say, is for live. Autoscaling group 2 is for staging. Whenever the pipeline is built, it will spin up corresponding agents in this autoscaling group. And if we have more builds to come, the autoscaling group will automatically scale. This is the existing setup that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, the setup is basically suitable for our project. If I see a new use case that has to accommodate different kind of production conditions, then we will come up with more design features. This is how you should answer this particular question in the interview. I hope it is clear. The next question is coming from the domain Docker, and the question is, have you come across TMPFS mounts in Docker? Temporary file system mounts in Docker. Okay. This is a very unique question. So if you have not come across this, you can just say, I don't know. It is fine. It is not a big deal that if you don't know, they will say, oh, you don't know this concept, we are not going to hire you. That is not going to happen. But if you know it, then try to answer it. But if you don't know, now you will know it, okay? So what is TMPS file system? In Docker, we have different kinds of file system. You guys should be aware of it. Different kinds of file systems are very important in use cases that comes across our Docker volumes. Now, one such file system is TMPS mount. It is a temporary and only persisted in the host memory. It is a temporary file system that will only persist on host memory, and it only works on Linux operating system, Linux host operating system. Okay. So if you have a Windows operating system, then TMPS file mount system will not work. So if you come across a question that will temporary file system mount work on Windows? No, it will not. It is only specific to Linux with the given setup of Docker today that I am making this video, okay? So what is this? When a container stops, the temporary file system is removed and the files written won't be persisted, okay? This is useful to temporarily store sensitive files that you don't want to persist either in the host or the container writable layer. Can you give me a use case of this? I will give you a use case of this so that you understand this better, okay? So let us take an example of a EC2 instance of your client. Now this is a foreign operating system. Maybe you want to run some quick checks and you want to do it from Docker. Now, if your Docker wants to function, it needs some secrets. If you follow the standard approach, then the secret will get persisted on this EC2 machine. It will get persisted on this EC2 machine. Remember, as I said this is your client for EC2 instance. You don't want to persist anything there that belongs to your company, and you don't want to save anything there. This is where temporary file systems comes into picture. So this is the use case, okay? If you were not aware of this, I think now it is clear. So how do you present this answer? Remember, as I said if you don't feel confident, say I have not come across this. But now that if you have understood this concept, then this is how you can present. Cool. Temporary file system, that is TMPS file system that we just mentioned, from what I can remember, is a unique file system methodology which is only active in the Linux operating system. If I want to run Docker on Linux operating systems, the key of TMPF file system, temporary file system, is it will not persist any kind of information when the Docker container is stopped. This gives us flexibility when we are using these kinds of Docker containers in a client machine where we don't want to leave any kind of sensitive information back and persist this information on the client EC2 instances. In these cases, these kind of file systems will help us. Personally, I have not come across this use case yet, but I have understood theoretically this concept when learning and using Docker practically. This is how you can present this particular answer. I hope this explanation was clear and these two questions are also clear. Thank you and speak to you in the next video.